Good evening and welcome to the Transportation and Parking Commission special meeting of Monday, April 13th. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Kirkjian? Here. Commissioner Yakubian? Commissioner Gonzalez?
Here.
Commissioner Bartusil?
Here.
Chairperson Sahakian?
Present. Next item, please.
Item 1B is the flag salute. Chairperson Sahakian.
Please rise. Pledge allegiance.
United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, nation, God, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Item 2 is posting of the agenda. The agenda for the Monday, April 13th, 2015 special meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by April 9th, 2015 before 5:30 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Thank you. Item 3.
Item 3 is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. The Commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision.
We don't have any speaker cards, so I'm going to open and close oral communications, and let's move on to item number 4.
At item 4, we have information only. And at item 4A is the downtown mobility study, overview of the plan and implementation update.
Chairperson Saki and members of the Commission, at the meeting of February 23rd, 2015, the Commission requested a special meeting where they can discuss a report on the downtown mobility study. The study was adopted by the City Council in 2007 and is currently in the implementation stage, and that implementation is being handled by Michael Nilsson and Alan Loomis, my colleagues in Community Development. A brief report was included in your packets, and I will turn things over to Mr. Loomis for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. And nice to see you again. This, as Shay mentioned, was requested at your last meeting that I attended, which I believe was in February, at the end of February. So, Michael, if you could click to the next slide. I'm going to introduce this part of it, then pass the presentation over to Michael. So as Shay mentioned, the downtown mobility study, or mobility plan, as is sometimes referred to, was adopted in early 2007, March of 2007, actually, shortly after the downtown specific plan was adopted in November of 2006. The downtown specific plan, as you may know, is the policy and design guidelines and zoning plan that really has encouraged and enabled much of the growth we've seen in the downtown over the past, since 2006, but especially in the past 5 years as we've emerged out of the recession. The downtown mobility study was developed in complete harmony with the downtown specific plan. So the mobility study was designed anticipating the level of growth that we're currently seeing. So the downtown specific plan had environmental impact report that was adopted along with it that included projections for how much growth, how much traffic we would see. This is the EIR is what gives rise to the proverbial number of approximately 3,900, roughly 4,000 units, and a little over 1 million square feet in new office and commercial development is what the downtown specific plan EIR anticipated. As of today, we're still under those thresholds in terms of the amount of development we're seeing in the downtown. So the downtown mobility study was designed anticipating that level of growth, and they're really put together. The plan, as Michael indicated, includes a number of interrelated policies, but the important piece that it included was a series of implementation measures. So the mobility plan adopted a series of recommendations and then a long table of recommendations about in year 1 or year 5, these are the sorts of procedures, policies, or programs or projects that should be adopted or in place by certain thresholds. And as Michael will delineate, we've by and large implemented a great measure and a large number of those particular benchmarks or implementation programs. To that extent, we tend to think the mobility study is, if you want to say it's obsolete in the sense that to a large extent what it called for us to do is now done. So Michael's presentation is really more like a report card on what's been accomplished since 2007. And it's important to note that some of the policies, well, today, looking back on it, in hindsight, we may sort of think we wish we had been a little more progressive or a little more aggressive about certain kinds of policies that the plan doesn't say. We have to put ourselves back in the context of 2006 and 2007 when the plan was adopted. And for example, as Shay and I were speaking earlier, 2007, when this plan was adopted, cycling was not part of the conversation. By and large, the commissions and the planning and the city council and a lot of constituent groups said nobody's ever going to bike in Glendale. And of course, we know today that there's a very robust conversation about cycling in Glendale. So in some ways, the mobility study prefigures or kind of made possible the discussion about cycling and ultimately the bicycle master plan that we're working with today. So that being said, I'll turn it over to Michael to kind of give you, as I said, the report card on what we've been doing with the plan, kind of its major highlights since it was adopted in 2007.
May we ask a question?
Of course.
Alan, you mentioned earlier that the growth we're still pretty much under that growth that was anticipated. And could you quantify that, please? I heard some square footages, and do you have a feel for how much we're under that projected?
I really should have the exact numbers in my head, although it's a dynamic environment, so they tend to change depending on what you measure. But the EIR associated with Downtown Specific Plan anticipated a little under 4,000 new residential units. I believe that in the downtown right now, in terms of what's been approved, built, under construction or recently opened as a result of the Downtown Specific Plan is somewhere around 3,000 units. We also anticipated a little over 1 million square feet in office space. Almost none of that has been built. I mean, we were expecting when we did the plan that we might see another high-rise office tower or two. And we really haven't seen a major expansion of retail square footage since the plan was adopted. The retail square footage is maintained pretty static.
So just so I understood it understand it, on there was a projection of approximately a little under 4,000 units.
Correct.
Currently under construction, not necessarily maybe in a application pipeline, are a little under 2,000.
3,000.
Oh, 3. Okay.
That's approximately 3,000.
I'm glad I asked
plus or
that.
minus a few hundred.
Yeah.
I don't have the number.
Yeah,
off
no,
the
just
top of my
plus or
head.
minus. And then of the office, 1 million square feet, almost none of that has happened.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
The 3,000 units, does that include the building on Colorado? I forgot what the new name for that is. Rio, yes. And Los Feliz and San Fernando Road and whatever's approved near Costco. There are a few buildings that are approved.
No, it doesn't include that. If you include those, it's probably closer to 3,600 new residential units. But the EIR for the downtown was only focused on the downtown area. There were previous approvals when San Fernando Road was rezoned for mixed-use zoning that addressed those sites.
So this doesn't, it only reflects downtown, not
Correct.
those. Okay,
Correct.
So nothing south of Colorado.
pretty much.
Yeah, the downtown specific plan boundaries is basically the south end is Colorado, the west side is Central Avenue, the east side is more or less Maryland. It jogs over Wilson to capture the Civic Center, and it goes as far north as Glen Oaks.
So it's more the central business district.
Yeah, what used to be known as the Central Business District, and including the Galleria and the Americana, of course.
So for tonight, I'm going to give you guys a brief refresh of the main points of each of the 6 policy concepts and what we've accomplished in our implementation, and also giving you guys a status update of what's in progress. So in regards to parking management, we've really the main concept of this was to park once. So you're looking at, instead of driving to all your various activities, whether that be going to the office, to school, or shopping, that you would park in one centralized location and walk to all those various destinations, reducing auto congestion as a result. Creating walkable environments also encourages people to stay longer at their respective destinations, promoting an 18-hour downtown. We also focus in parking management to manage existing resources versus constructing new infrastructure. So some of the results of that is that we installed pay-by-space meters back in 2008 along Brand Boulevard, and since then we've had about $750,000 in yearly revenue from those parking meters, and that's $750,000 per year. And our average meter revenue growth has been about $60,000 per year since they've been installed. Also, back in 2013, we adopted our first district-based permit parking district along South Brand Boulevard. We've made that a lot easier for residents to obtain permit parking, and that ordinance can be expanded in the future into downtown if there's an issue with the nearby commercial districts with spillover parking.
This is the preferential permit parking?
Correct. And then what we're working on currently right now is that we have obtained a $694,000 grant from Metro through their competitive call for projects process to install a whole set of wayfinding signs to our downtown parking resources. We went to City Council in November 2014 to approve the grant funding for that project. We're now in the process of producing bid packages for those signs, and we expect the signs to be up in downtown sometime in 2016. So that includes a whole system of signs that have that show the amount of spaces that are available. A couple of those in real time. We'll have those along Brand Boulevard, and also have them right outside of our public parking structures. Another policy concept that we explored in the mobility study was transportation demand management, or TDM, as it's commonly referred to in its abbreviation. This is a concept that encourages people to use alternative modes of transportation, so therefore reducing the reliance on single occupant driving and encouraging the reduction of traffic congestion. A Transportation Management Association, or a TMA, is a membership-based nonprofit organization that's in charge of managing TDM programs for companies. Go Glendale is the city's local TMA, and TDM programs include reduced transit passes, car share services such as Zipcar, rideshare programs, and required yearly ridership assessments to monitor mode choice for companies that are members of a TMA. So in 2011, we adopted a updated transportation demand management ordinance, and that revised and strengthened ordinance now requires that most new construction within downtown Glendale become members of a TMA to implement transportation demand management programs. And currently, out of the 2,500 dwelling units that are under construction in the downtown specific plan, 82% of those buildings that are fall in that category are required to be TMA members. And out of the buildings that have recently received occupancy, they're Lexon Orange, the brand will be required to join Go Glendale. As a result of that, we've had a 35% increase in TMA membership over the past year, and we've also secured a $750,000 grant through Metro to manage commuter programs. In regards to transit infrastructure, the goals of the policies in the mobility study focus on improving the efficiency of existing transit resources and operations. Since 2008, the city has updated their fare structure to maintain bus operations. we've constructed a CNG fueling facility down by the Glendale Transportation Center, so our buses can fuel here instead of having to drive all the way up to Burbank. As you see in the picture on the slide, we've installed real-time bus arrival information along Brand Boulevard and new shelters throughout the downtown specific plan area, as well as the city's also secured over $10 million for new buses. In 2013, in fact, our city had the first all CNG low-floor bus fleet in the entire county. We've also secured over $12.7 million in grant funding for a consolidated B-line bus maintenance facility that we are going to construct over by the Glendale Transportation Center, and we expect that construction process to start sometime later this year, with expectations for that to finish sometime in 2016. In regards to pedestrian improvements, the downtown specific plan had a very clear vision of establishing walkability as a priority, as well as mentioning that in the mobility study. However, as Alan said, the mobility study reflected very briefly on bicycles. However, it did give us the base policy framework to be able to go after other grant projects to further construct our bicycle and pedestrian policy framework. In 2011, we've adopted the Safe and Healthy Streets Plan. That was the city's first pedestrian and bicycle policy document, and that did receive a SCAG Compass Blueprint Award for our policy work. Just 1 year after that, we adopted the Bicycle Transportation Plan, which set a full outline of bicycle infrastructure improvements. So since 2012, we've installed about 28 miles of bicycle infrastructure. We're expecting to install 5 additional miles in 2015. And we've also conducted bicycle and pedestrian counts back in 2009, 2010, and 2013. And from our count from 2010 to 2013, we've seen a 36% increase in bicycling. However, we know that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in the realm of pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. So the city has been aggressively going after grant funding for continued improvements in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. So our latest focus is really to improve the safety for bicyclists and pedestrians. And we've received about $5 million in funding for various policies, programs, and infrastructure. And we expect to start this effort up in summer of this year to start up the citywide pedestrian plan and citywide safety education initiative. We've also, the downtown mobility study also looked at moving cars efficiently and safely through downtown. So it's not just about transit and walking and demand management. So since then, we have invested over 20 million road improvements, including improvements to Brand Boulevard and also Colorado Street and Central Avenue. Another item that has been discussed in the downtown mobility study was improvements to Glendale Avenue, which is one of the more congested corridors. So they also looked at recommendations to improve access between Broadway and the 134 freeway. And one of the other things that mobility study also looked at, albeit briefly, was a regional vision to connect downtown Glendale to the surrounding region. And one of those proposals was to cap the 134 freeway between Central Avenue and Brand Boulevard. We have since then gone after grant funding through the Southern California Association of Governments to look at the feasibility of putting that cap over the 134 freeway. And one of the interesting concepts about this is that we're exploring the possibility of a transportation hub for the east-west connector. So the North Hollywood Red Line to the gold mine over in Pasadena. So that was a concept that was briefly discussed in the mobility study and the downtown specific plan. We have since gone after grant funding to explore those options further through feasibility studies. So Alan Loomis will will discuss this project and several other projects in further detail when he'll talk about the projects discussed as a potential in Measure R2. So with that, that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, myself or Alan will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Question. Almost every week when you hear the news, there's bicycle accidents all over the city, county. This grant that we're securing, how is it going to be implemented for bicycles education?
So the grants that we received, we are well aware that there's high accident rates, and in fact, per the count that we just did, that bicycle accidents have gone up. So once we got that data, we went after 3 Caltrans active transportation grants. So the first one would be to do a citywide pedestrian plan that would really focus on improving pedestrian safety. And the other one is a citywide safety education initiative. So that would be a full, that would combine all the existing efforts that are going on with safe routes to school, but also go out after various population sectors that are most impacted by accidents and really go in and look at, through the pedestrian plan effort, where those accidents are occurring and what infrastructure improvements need to occur. So it will probably not only look at pedestrian safety, but safety overall in terms of
Absolutely.
Infrastructure-wise, what improvements need to be made, literally intersection by intersection. That's our intention in terms of producing a document that we could, after a 2 or 3 year effort, in terms of going out to the community, conducting outreach, doing a citywide level analysis on infrastructure improvements that need to happen, to go after that document is adopted 2 or 3 years from now, to literally go in and go after grant funding to make those improvements infrastructure-wise, and to continue monitoring the safety, monitoring accident data, monitoring how many pedestrians and cyclists are in our intersections.
Do we have a database of how many bicyclists are in town and how many are bicyclist transients we have that come out of city? Like you see on weekends, folks who are on the bicycle groups, they're all over town, especially on weekends. Do we have a count of bicyclists?
So what we do have is that we do conduct a citywide bicycle and pedestrian count. We have done that back in 2009, 2010, and 2013, and we intend to do that either every other year or every year as part of our active transportation grant funding. So what we literally do is we select about 36 locations throughout the city, locations that we know have had high volumes, high accident rates, or both, to really monitor where and yes, it's a sampling, but it's a sampling that we do a weekday count and a weekend count, and we've kept the count locations consistent. The methodology that we use to conduct those counts is in line with our regional agency, the Southern California Association of Governments, and that data is entered into a clearinghouse that's managed by, I believe it's managed by UCLA and SCAG. So our data, the way we collect data for who bikes and walks in the city, is the same way that somebody if the city of Glendale did counts, if the city of Los Angeles did counts, it's the same method, same process, and that's been vetted regionally.
Thank you.
Questions on this side?
I have a couple of questions. Yes, please. Thank you. On the notion of the Park Once concept, If you can go to that visual, please. This is a incredibly wonderful concept, and I didn't understand what strategies we are using to implement that. I understand the concept and the visual that's depicted there, but what have we done in Glendale to promote this? And then I have a couple of questions depending on the response.
So what we've done in Glendale is since it's more probably more significant if you go in a time machine and go back to see the way things were in 2005, 2006 versus what you see today. Which I go into downtown Glendale and don't even blink in terms of from paying to park in front of businesses in Brand Boulevard to the 90 minutes free in the nearby parking structures. So the situation that what parking in downtown Glendale was like in 2005, 2006 is that all the parking on Brand Boulevard was free, and then all the parking in the structures were the most expensive, that were had the most spots and were 2 or 3 blocks away. So what happened is that while people were cruising for that elusive free parking spot on Brand, there was Orange Street parking garage and Marketplace and Exchange, which are just blocks away, that were literally empty. So that was the first thing that we did in terms of changing those policies, is to actually price the parking according to its demand. So what we did back in 2008 is that we worked with the downtown merchants, who were basically the predecessors to our business improvement district in downtown today, and got their support to be able to charge for parking along Brand Boulevard. And we were really looking at that as a strategy to control, to get traffic to flow better and to direct people to our parking structures. So I don't know if you've seen the blue and white signs that say 90 minutes free. Mm-hmm. So that was really a strategy to, as visitors are driving down Brand Boulevard, to just pull them off and say, there's plenty of parking at Orange Street or at the Marketplace or Exchange, and the first 90 minutes is free.
If I may just elaborate on that one briefly. The other important part is that by encouraging drivers to just park in the public parking structures and then walk, you are encouraging them to park once, because one of the dynamics that was happening before the pay-by-space meters went into place on Brand Boulevard, there was 2 hours free parking. What was actually happening is that it was actually a lot of the employees of merchants were parking in there, and after their 2 hours was about to expire, they'd go move their car further down the block on their break. So they were parking twice, and they're obviously just employees. They weren't the customers. So now with the pay-by-space, the employees are really encouraged to get the monthly passes and just park in the garage, as well as visitors who are not willing to pay the fee or the fare for on the parking meter.
Are there any strategies that you find that need to be addressed in order to enhance the concept of parking once in the Central Business District?
Well, Mike can elaborate, but I would say definitely the wayfinding system and the real-time information that we're trying to put forward through our next grant is definitely a major component.
Wayfinding for the driver of the vehicles?
Yes.
On where to park?
Yes, we want to elaborate on that.
And,
sure.
And I think I heard you're going to implement signage to help that.
Yes, yes. So let me...
So are the number of spaces sufficient in the downtown area for the number of units that you've been mentioning, and then the ones that are potentially coming?
Yes, every project that has been approved since 2006, I'm not going to say every project, but the vast majority of them have provided code-compliant parking. So they've provided the amount of parking on site that the code requires. And in some cases, a few extra spaces, because the developers sort of thought that they needed a few extra spaces. And what we've seen, actually, interestingly, is that the projects that are providing those few extra spaces are oftentimes reserving them for electric vehicles or reserving them for potential zip car tenants. So there's a hopefully in the near future, we'll see a critical mass where almost every one of those new buildings will have a zip car, kind of shared car membership stationed in the building for the tenants to take advantage of.
Was there a visual that showed the parking structures on Brand, or off of Brand, I should say? Did I miss that showed what the city has already or not?
We unfortunately do not have that.
Okay. I'm curious as to, is there any possibility of the city developing through zoning credits the notion of a parking structure that could be paid for by those that are applying for permits, and then centralize specifically where the parking should go, as opposed to having the parking only be at the applicant that's getting a building permit for his or her building? Progressive cities are doing this, and it's juicy for zoning, but it works. And I'm wondering if there's any spot that, as professional staff, you believe that there will be a need for parking, and instead of just putting all that parking requirement on the site itself, to find a parking structure that's within the park once notion that will suffice for, if not office buildings, even some housing potentially, but mostly office buildings and restaurants and retail. So you get people to park in those spaces and then have to walk to where they want to go.
Sure. What I can say we've done is, as part of the list of implementation that Mike has discussed, we do have an in lieu parking fee. So a developer who comes in and wants to provide, they're required to provide so much amount of parking. If it's a new project, they can actually provide up to 50% of that parking through an in lieu fee. In other words, you basically write a check to the city that goes into the parking fund for the purposes of enhancing parking resources and potentially building a new parking structure. And that's how you meet your parking requirement. None of the projects that have come in have, with one exception, and that's the proposed Hyatt Place Hotel, have taken advantage of that. And the Hyatt Hotel is a unique circumstance where you can understand they're not seeing a huge demand to have on-site parking. Most of the residential projects really believe they need to have on-site parking to market the units. I mean, Glendale, it's not downtown LA yet, or Hollywood, where you're willing to put your car in a structure as a resident 2 or 3 blocks away. Now, office and employees and retail and customers, restaurant customers, are willing to park in a structure a few blocks away. So the goal of the in lieu fee was that ultimately there would be, as land value went up, it may be the case where developers would choose to take advantage of that, and the city would be able to sort of park that money, save it for the purpose of building a future parking structure. But specifically where you're going with this is that to try and encourage a private developer through some sort of tax credit or something along those lines. To build parking, we've not explored that at all.
It would seem like, given the critique that we read about and hear about, that there's not enough spaces downtown, that it seems like it might be good to start to determine where a strategic parking structure would go that would also have retail on the first floor, of course, and make plans to develop one under a park once notion and a zoning credit concept, so that, and I'm talking only for retail and offices, not homes or apartments necessarily, although there are some where that's happening. But I think you're right, Alan, for Glendale, it definitely would focus on offices and retail. But I think that what would be good is to see if we could find a strategic spot for that parking structure or structures that make people go and park there, and then they walk to their destination within the park once notion.
Right.
And it just livens up a community.
But I can tell you at this point, given identifying the strategic sites is very easy because the city doesn't own that much land in the downtown. And they're pretty much current parking lots. And the largest one is the parking lot behind Porto's.
Right.
I think,
and that's not 90-minute free parking.
No, because that's a metered parking lot,
right.
And people are more than willing to pay the
Does that belong
there.
to the city?
Yes. I think we're some years away when the parking lot behind Porto's gets converted into a garage, just to be honest. But I do want to come back in that the 3 existing parking structures that we have are not yet to a place where they're oversubscribed.
I see.
You hear anecdotally that there's not parking, but the reality is the top floors of those parking structures is oftentimes leased to the auto dealers for car storage, not for
Interesting.
customers coming to the downtown.
So the city gets some revenue for that.
Yeah, I mean, because we're not parking customers there,
Sure.
so the car dealers need a place to store cars. So the 3 parking structures have capacity. Now, the wayfinding system that Mike has talked about here, one of the components of that is there will be real-time data coming out of the 3 parking structures onto signs at strategic decision points in the downtown street network that will tell you, for example, there'll be a sign on Brand Boulevard that will indicate there's so many spaces available right now in the Orange Street Garage.
Not necessarily by level, but by total cars. And
By
then,
total
and then when
car,
you
yeah.
get to the structure by level.
You might have to go up to 3 levels.
Right.
Yeah. When I hear people say there's no parking available in downtown, and I think there's a couple of qualifiers in there.
Right.
There's no free parking available in downtown right in front of the business I want to go.
Right, right.
Would that be interfaced to an app, to some type of a handheld device that you can access and see where's the parking spaces available?
That is something that we're exploring. We're looking at the third-party apps that we could just simply supply information to, so that could potentially go up. We don't have that funded as part of our Metro grant, but it's certainly something that we can explore as we, put the project out to bid and see.
And I'll tell you why. Here's my concern. Looking back to 2006, you're absolutely right. It looks like we've done a lot of headway. We've done a lot of work. But looking at it right now, I feel that we're behind a lot of progressive cities, as the council, as my colleague said. For example, our on-demand pricing for parking, it's not true on-demand pricing. It's not based on an hourly or rate. So we're fooling ourselves if we say that it's on demand. The transit system. We are constantly improving the existing infrastructure versus thinking ahead and saying that, enough with the buses, enough with the existing services. We have improved them enough. Let's think what's the next step to the cutting edge next step, such as a light rail, such as a PRT, that's going to take us to the next level. The bicycle lanes, we keep improving them, fine and dandy. My position on that is you need cycle tracks. You need protected bike lanes if you're going to start encouraging people to use bicycles. Otherwise, they're not going to use them. It's as simple as that. We see them all over the place. I mean, the experienced bicyclists, they might use them, but for a parent to have their kids allow them to go out and bike on a major highway, on Brand Boulevard or on Glen Oaks, unless it's a protected bicycle lane, you're not going to see it. It's as simple as that. So what I want to see is I want to see staff, and you guys are probably doing that. You're professionals thinking ahead 5-10 years ahead, and start looking at some of the sister cities that are already doing it, and it could be because they have bigger departments, they have better funding, but we're a big city here. I mean, we're a great city, Glendale. And you by looking the other day, I was looking at the skyline, and I was like, my God, that this is a true city that's progressing fastly, and I feel that the transportation infrastructure is falling behind. So that's where I want this commission to start assisting staff with ideas to move forward with this, and obviously we'll be open to ideas coming from you. Now, Measure R2, whatever you want to call it, is a great opportunity to do that. And if we have any projects that we can identify now, and obviously, if there's no money, you're not going to realize these projects. But if there's a means to identify these projects and put a number to it and lobby for it aggressively, and even if we realize 20-30% of our wish list, it could be huge. That's my comment.
I have a question about 6. I'm looking at the matrix, although I it's not pulling up on my iPad anymore. 63B, the parking cash out item. Can you tell me a little bit more about that program?
What number is that again?
6.3B.
Okay. So the parking cash out law is something where you can, instead of parking, if you don't drive in and park your car in the structure by where you work, you get a voucher instead to, use transit, or if you bike, you could just get an additional, however so many dollars it's determined in terms of a subsidy in place of driving to work.
So is that something that we're currently pursuing in Glendale?
That is something that is not in place right now. There has been companies in the past like Nestle that have had a parking cash out program. It's one of the things that through the Oro Verdugo commute manager grant that our Go Glendale TMA, that's one of the things that they could explore further, but it's not currently in place.
Okay.
If I may, a parking cash out program is, it basically gives you cash for non-driving. Where it's the most effective is when you also have to pay for parking, obviously. So,
yeah,
and that's been one of the problems in terms of implementing a parking cash out program. The fact that most of our major office towers don't charge for parking; they subsidize it or provide it free for their employees. Parking cash out program, limited effectiveness.
Got it. Along the same lines, 5.7B, allocating parking revenue to further enhance transportation or streetscape improvements. What's the status on that? I didn't know that I wasn't aware that we were doing that.
We are not. So we did, let's see, so we initially we did all the research and the policy recommendations for the Downtown Transportation Fund. We actually have an in lieu fee that we instituted. And we do have funds coming from our downtown meters.
So the in lieu fee is for developers. It's not revenue that's coming in from customers using the meters.
No, so there's two.
So the table is not clear in that distinction.
Yeah, the in lieu fee is an opportunity for developers doing new or renovating projects, whereas the parking meters, obviously, as customers, as you pay your fee, your parking ticket,
right,
or pay the meter, you're putting money into the parking fund. Both the in lieu fee and the meters coming, or the money being generated by the parking meters and the parking garages goes into the parking fund. It's currently used largely for the parking, the operations and cost of maintaining the parking structures and the parking operations.
Right. So I'm really intrigued by that notion of enhancing the streetscape and the area in which the revenues are being generated. I know Pasadena does that with their downtown area, and I would be a strong advocate for that if for some reason rates were to increase and there was excess money that would supplement the money that it takes to operate parking. I would be all for that because I don't think the businesses would be against it. I think it would be great to enhance those streets, particularly Brand Boulevard. The real-time bus arrival displays at the bus stops, it does not include the metro buses, correct? It's just the local Beeline buses that offer the real-time arrival.
When they first went in, I believe that to be the case, and the reason is that Metro and the Beeline were using two separate systems to communicate real-time bus information when those shelters went into place. Metro, I believe, has since kind of come to the conclusion that the proprietary system that they were using is not as effective as the next bus system. that most of the smaller operators are using. So that may change.
Oh, okay.
But I believe that, if I'm remembering correctly, Shay, you were involved. Am I remembering this correctly?
Well, I know that when they were first implemented, it was definitely only the B-line on there. And also when they were first implemented, they were only along Brand Boulevard.
Correct.
I don't know if it's been...
We haven't expanded it. No.
Okay. So if Metro is going to be using our hardware now, then that'd be good news.
Yeah, that's my recollection is Metro and the local operators used a different technology for NextBus.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And then my last question, about the bicycle infrastructure. We talked about 5 miles of improvements being installed in 2015. How many of those are actual bike lanes?
Let me go to the... So I don't have the exact distance for you, but Sonora Avenue is a colored bike lane, and that is least like a mile and a half. Then Mountain, those are Sharrows, and Allen is Sharrows. So say it's approximately 1.5 is bike lanes, and the 3.5 are Sharrows.
Okay. I want to echo Chairperson Sahakian's comments about the type of facilities that we're looking at and what we're installing in the year 2015. I think the colored bike lane on Sonora is a great example of what we can do to enhance the safety for bicyclists. And I think cycle tracks is long overdue in the city, particularly with the track record we have on safety. So Glen Oaks has bike lanes, and that's nice. I don't particularly feel safe riding my bike alongside cars that are going 50 miles an hour. And I think the street is wide enough where we can, reduce the width of the travel lanes at the very least to create enough space to accommodate for cycle tracks along Glen Oaks. And of course, other streets can be perfect.
That's going in both directions. In both directions.
Correct.
Enough room for both directions. A couple of more. I'm sorry. You have an answer to that?
No, it's not an answer. It's a commentary to that the point is well taken by both the chair and other commissioners that the mobility study doesn't go far enough in terms of what we would consider progressive transportation planning or engineering today in 2015. I think the staff that has worked on this is well aware of that, but we're operating off of a document that was conceived in 2006 in a very kind of different time frame, I would say, in the city of Glendale's history, and it's kind of thinking about transportation. It does raise the issue, as I said, that the mobility study in terms of the checklist of the projects we were supposed to pursue is largely complete. And we've had plenty of discussions, and staff, Mike and I, about what is the next move, what's the next step, and kind of where do we go from here?
Like an updated study.
Yeah, we are thinking there is time to do an updated study and perhaps expand its scope and its thinking beyond the downtown to cover other initiatives that we've taken since then, such as the Safe and Healthy Streets Plan, the Bike Master Plan, as well as the pedestrian plan and other programs that we've got grant money lined up for starting this year.
And another comment, don't be shy of using us. The commissioners at this table, they're here to help you guys. We look up to you, and we're your lobbyists. Whatever you need from us to go to council, to do whatever it takes to realize your projects, we're here to help you. We're not here to comment or criticize, what you're implementing or what you're doing. We truly appreciate your hard work with the little resources that you have. We're here to help.
Thank you.
A couple of more questions. I know some of the meters on Central Avenue, they don't accept credit cards. They're digital, but they're the old style meters. And I did get some emails on that that, they're inconvenient because most people use credit cards now to pay for parking. Any plan to implement that, to change those meters, including, I think, the ones behind Portos? They're just coin meters, aren't they?
My understanding is that, and I need to verify this through our parking manager, Tad Dombrowski, but my understanding is that we have been looking to install single head meters that accept credit cards.
Okay.
That is something that is in process. Now I have to verify that.
Yeah.
But I know that was something that.
If we can look into that, because honestly, that's going to probably generate more revenue.
Right.
So we should definitely follow up on that. And my last question is, all the improvements that we're doing to the mass transit system, to the bus system, are we using any method to measure if there's a trend of people moving from driving to using the mass transit system because of convenience or because of the improvements, or it's something that we'll look in the future?
What we do measure right now, obviously, is we do bus counts, passengers boarding and alighting on buses. At this point, it's hard to sort of correlate that and ask everybody getting on and off a bus, did you have the option to ride a car?
Sure.
So we just have raw data, and we can tell you whether the data is going up or down, but that isn't necessarily causal to somebody making that choice to use transit because there's more transit. We can't make that correlation. What we are hoping to do through the TMA, or Go Glendale, is their requirements of their members is to do an annual ridership survey. So we in City Hall employees do this.
Yeah.
So we fill out a form, how many days a week did you carpool or you take transit or drive by yourself. So the same kind of forms would be required of TMA members on an annual basis. And hopefully, now that the TMA is a little bit more robust and their membership is growing, especially in the downtown, we might be able to eventually infer some trends based on their ridership data. So for example, a lot of these new apartment buildings, residential buildings are going into place. They'll have to ask, how do you get around town?
Yeah,
Is it
and
transit?
honestly,
are you biking? Are you driving? And we'll.
Every time I drive Central Avenue, I'm just terrified, because as is during PM peak, I bet you every intersection is probably at level service F. And how many units we have on Central once done, north of.
On Central specifically, I want to guess around 2,000.
About 2,000 units, and the freeway access. And I mean, ideally, I would have liked to see a subway station under one of those buildings, but that's wishful thinking. But we need to do something about it, because we know what's going to happen. And I know what's going to happen when they're at full occupancy, those buildings. I think it was Saturday from Glen Oaks to the Americana took me 17 minutes the back way going down. This was on a Saturday. And those buildings, they're still under construction. All right. Should we move on? Thank you.
The only question I would ask is if we can get some feedback on the notion of whether an updated mobility study or expanded study should be looked at and where that could be in the budget, because it'll be almost 10 years when that study was done, and it was appropriately stated already that there were certain things that changed, and it seems like the commission would want to support, at least depending on whether their staff has any viewpoints on it, to see about getting such a study expanded or thought of and budgeted so that we can be current with the current issues that we have.
If I may briefly answer that kind of concern, one of our major planning projects right now is a community plan for South Glendale. We did a North Glendale community plan. It was adopted in 2011. That was kind of the neighborhoods of Montrose, La Crescenta, Bar Heights. South Glendale community plan is the real urban heart of the city, and it's defined as basically everything south of the freeways. The freeway is such a kind of strong geographic boundary line to work with. We anticipate that plan coming in front of commissions for consideration sometime next year, hopefully end of 2016, 2017, in front of council for adoption. So insofar as the South Glendale Community Plan encompasses downtown where the majority of the traffic and transportation mobility issues are located, it has a fairly significant mobility component. So that may be one place where some of the information, updated mobility study will reside. To that end, and this is part of grant money that we received from Metro, we're also updating our citywide traffic model. So actually as of this month, there are the little hoses that are out on the streets to sort of do the traffic counts at various key intersections so we can appropriately calibrate that model.
So that I hear that study is ongoing or waiting to be funded to be done? I missed it, I'm sorry.
Different pieces of it are funded through different grants that we've been successful in getting at. There's also the pedestrian master plan and some other grants associated that are very specific to pedestrian planning. Our goal is that those various planning efforts are not isolated, that they do sort of talk to one another. And it's a huge advantage that the staff working on the majority of those planning efforts, Mike is the project manager for component of the South Glendale Community Plan. He's also the project manager for components of the pedestrian master plan. So I know all that stuff rattles around in his head simultaneously.
And that was called the Southern Glendale?
South Glendale Community Plan.
South Glendale Community Plan.
Yeah, the ultimate goal would be to have 4 community plans, north, south, east, and west. East and west will be some point in the future after the South plan is adopted.
Yeah, I also think it's time for another study, and it shouldn't be looked at. It should be done honestly. What's happening? I mean, there's still a lot of old dwellings in the city that eventually will get bought off, and new developers will come in and will start developing these lots or tear down the old buildings as long as they're not, historical, and build them up. And obviously, to maximize on profit, they're going up. They're building more units, and even if they're mixed use, which is great, to maximize profit, they're putting in as many units or business square footage as possible, and we're playing catch up when it comes to commuting, mass transit, and mobility. And we're just enhancing the existing infrastructure instead of making it a requirement, to build the light rail, to build the PRTs, if you know what I mean.
To piggyback on what you said, based on our experiences here, parking is also a problem in South Glendale. I mean, we had 2 experiences last year where everybody's complaining about street parking, where all the streets are underparked and all the garages are used for storage and so forth. So even though we're thinking of transportation, we also have to think of parking too. But if you take out parking, where are these people going to park? I think that's a serious issue, and we've heard a lot of folks over here, and they're screaming bloody murder when it comes to parking. I mean, we have, even though having bike and pedestrian lanes is a necessity, it's something essential, we cannot neglect parking. And I don't know what can be done working with parked cars in already established neighborhoods in south of the freeway. We're talking only new high-rise developments, and those guys need to come in and out of the same on and off ramps that we all going to go get on and off. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of parking in existing residential neighborhoods, the Transportation Parking Commission some years ago, I want to say approximately 4 years ago, did create a subcommittee at the request of council to work with staff to explore options and kind of dive into that particular issue that you mentioned. There seems to be a decent number of apartment buildings or residential units where the parking garage is used to store stuff and not cars, and so the cars are pushed out onto the street. It is a code enforcement issue ultimately to try and get people to clean out their garages, and I'd hazard to guess any of us who've got garages in this room are probably using it to store stuff and parking our cars in our driveway or on the street. So we didn't really, as I recall, we didn't come to any kind of strong conclusions about how to address the specific micro issues. What came out of that ultimately, as Mike alluded to, was a revision of the preferential parking ordinance that made it easier for residents and neighborhoods to request preferential parking districts and do it by districts and zones rather than individual streets. At the time, that was seemed to be the kind of best solution to the issue of parking. And it's compounded in South Glendale, where you do have a number of older apartment buildings, and especially the ones that date back to the 20s and 30s that have no parking because they were built when the red car, Pacific Electric car ran up Brand Boulevard, and people could ride transit. It was a different era. And as we know, as neighborhoods are relatively crowded, and there's a lot of cars down there, not adequate parking on site for those cars.
And the same thing is true for streets like Mountain, as Mike mentioned, where we're going to put bike lanes. Put the bike lanes where the parking is going to go. Where are those homeowners going to park? It's a narrow street the way it is.
We're actually just putting sharrows in, which are shared lane markings. So there's going to be no changes to parking's not going to be removed. It's all going to. We're just adding paint to note where bikes can ride, basically.
I'm sorry, I have just one final thing, and that is mostly for information. There was a couple of visuals up here that talked about Glendale Yes or Glendale something to make partnerships with businesses in the parking areas. What was that called?
Is Glendale Go or Go Glendale?
Go Glendale?
Yes, yeah. You likely already know this, but there's a major company, or I should say government entity that moved into to Glendale. The State Board of Equalization has got about 4 or 5 floors in downtown now. And I don't know how many hundred employees they have there, but they may be already contacted by the city. But if not, it would seem like, given first time I've heard of this program, it seems like that might be a good partnership because there's quite a few people there.
Yeah, I'm actually going to meet with her next week, so
Good.
I'll definitely get in contact with her about that.
Good, thank you.
How are the city lots doing now, the Orange and the Maryland lots? They're still not at capacity, correct?
No, there's times when they get to a peak of about 85 to 90%, and that's with all the cars, including the cars that are used for auto storage from Brand Boulevard. And it's interesting because their peaks are at different times. So at any one time, there's if Orange Street, let's say, is about 85% full, you could go 2 blocks over to the Exchange and it's only half full. Their peaks are at completely different times.
Wayfinding is going to be really handy.
It's going to be so helpful. I can't wait till the signs go up because there's times when that does get tight at any one of the 3 structures, but thankfully, based on our data, there's usually at least 2 out of the 3 that have plenty of spaces.
And what do you need from us? What does it take? How can we help you to make the interface for the app, for the mobile phones? How can we realize that? I think it's really important, especially if you have a public outreach and the word really goes out that there's an app, you click it if you're in the CBD area, and it tells you exactly where their space is available.
That would help increase business, too.
It does. And technology is there. It's not much. Funding-wise, it's not much either. So what does it take? What do you need from us to help you on that?
I mean, it's really more of, as we go through the process of getting the project started up, we're still in the process of producing bid documents, and we're still doing some design refinements on the side, on the signs. So we're certainly not finished with the project. And that's as a project manager, that'll be certainly something that I can bring up with the members of the Public Works Department. And
maybe it's easier to interface it now during the design phase versus when you're done to add it on.
Right.
It could be costlier.
Right.
Make it part of the bid package.
Yeah.
It strikes me that making that sort of data available to an app is kind of I don't want to say sort of a back-end thing on the technology that's actually monitoring it. And
you're right.
Probably just a matter of making the data sets, the real-time data about what's available in the garages or on Brand Boulevard, finding a way to make that data available to an app developer. And we do that with a good amount of our data. Just the other, earlier this month, there was a presentation called Property Portal that was about providing certain kind of building permits and planning permit information that's logged into the city system available to the public through the city's website. So we already make certain elements of our data sets available to the public, so we just have to find that boundary line to make
Because
that
I
data
think
set
at the
available.
express parking in LA, it even tells you what meters on the streets are available.
Right. Yeah, I know when we first started working on this, Santa Monica as a website, you can log in and find out how many parking spaces are available in one of the downtown garages. And then you can watch that number go up or down while
yeah.
you're sitting at your desk.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, Mr. Chair, I said I had only one more, but I thought about another one here because, and I apologize, but this has to do, I think, with the mobility study and just reading about current information. The owner of the Americana, I guess it was in the papers, everyone's aware of, is buying the building, the Masonic Lodge across the street to the
You bought
east.
it already.
They bought it already, okay. How is the parking for that being handled as an office building? If I'm not mistaken, that was built at a time when there was no parking for that building, that parking lot. Is there parking for that building as an office building?
Not on site.
That's right,
The
that's right.
arrangement that Mr. Caruso has with the Masonic Temple is he's going to allow the office tenants to park in the Americana.
See, that's good business.
So they'll walk across the street
Well-
and probably stop at Coffee Bean.
Exactly. And that goes back again to parking once.
And it's not the only lot that's being developed. The adjacent lot
Yeah, to the south, right?
to the
To the
south,
south. That used to belong to the DiPietros, I believe. They're
Yeah,
the-
and the Caruso affiliate is purchasing that site as well.
yeah.
So again, an opportunity maybe for parking structure there. Or is that parking also going to be done at the Americana?
Well, under the original approvals that the DiPietro family received regarding the Masonic Temple, they were going to convert the vacant lot with the pumpkin patch, if you will. That was going to be converted into a surface parking lot for potential office users in the Masonic Temple.
Temporary.
Temporarily, kind of permanently temporary. The Caruso team has indicated their intention to develop that site, and I would imagine they'll probably put a restaurant there.
Mixed-use restaurants and residential on top, I heard, with parking.
I haven't heard anything about
Yeah.
residential. It's a difficult site to provide parking for. It's very constrained.
It is, it is.
But parking across the street at the Americana makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even parking on Maryland, it's a short walk.
I have really two quick notes. The app integration, I think the My Glendale app would be a cool go-to place for residents. It is primarily geared towards filing a complaint or submitting a report, but it might be a nice place to host what the situation is with parking downtown. So something to consider. And then something just popped into my mind about the Park Once concept that we're trying to pursue. There's this movement out there that I've seen in other urban areas of having these signs that display how long it takes or how many minutes of a walk it would take to get to a certain destination. And I just happened to have one from Pittsburgh when I went over there last year for a conference. It's a 5-minute walk to the story of Pittsburgh. So they had these signs all over the city for people that were visiting who are not so acquainted with the city and its fabric, just to let people know how easy it is to get around by walking. And our downtown is very walkable. It's the whole reason why I moved to that neighborhood, so that I can walk everywhere. And to this day, I get so surprised when somebody can't fathom the idea of walking a few blocks to get to the Americana. So I think it's another visual reminder for people that may not be necessarily used to walking around so much, that it's just a few minutes walk to get to XYZ. It's very easy. It's like corrugated cardboard if you want to just try it out as a pilot. I think it would be really neat to see that around town.
Okay. Next.
The next item that we have is the San Fernando Valley Council of Governments Mobility Matrix. This was discussed at the February 23rd meeting of the TPC. We had a lengthy discussion, or there was a lengthy discussion on this item, and there's some additional information that Alan Loomis is here to present to you regarding this issue.
Okay.
Before you go into it, does somebody have an extra hard copy? My iPad has failed me. Thank you.
Before I jump into this, and I do want to note that I provided for the commissioners and staff available an email I received from the organization Move LA. Move LA is not a subsidiary of Metro, but I think they're probably in some fashion working in collaboration with Metro, and they've been hosting a number of town halls and other associated meetings around the region promoting Measure R2 or Measure X, or how such a funding scenario could work, and doing a number of interactions. One of the events I attended, which was held in Van Nuys, included various maps that showed different kinds of projects. Participants were invited to provide green dots if they really liked a particular project, as a way of sort of gauging public interest for different kinds of capital infrastructure. At the last meeting, the Commission asked to be provided an update of when these meetings occur. So this is an email I received for a meeting on April 22nd at Union Station, if you have an interest in attending. I'm happy to be back here to follow up on the conversation we started a few months ago. Hopefully I have a little bit more information. Trying to track what's happening with Measure R2 it's a very fluid, very dynamic discussion, and happening at multiple levels of both Metro and different kind of regional governments, and also with Move LA and other kind of stakeholder groups that exist in the region. So I'm going to start with this graphic. This is obviously, you could see, as a graphic pulled from Move LA, but it showcases what they're calling a straw man proposal relative to Measure R2. Their proposition is Measure R2. Let's say the pie chart of how Mundy is distributed or split follows along Measure R, and this is basically what it would look like. So Measure R, as you recall, has been adopted, is in effect, and is funding a number of transportation infrastructure projects such as the Expo Light Rail, the Crenshaw Line, I believe also the Gold Line extending east into the San Gabriel Valley, as well as a variety of other kind of smaller projects, bus and pedestrian operations. We have a significant amount of Measure R dollars flowing to the city of Glendale for infrastructure improvements, and a good deal of money that's actually particularly earmarked towards pedestrian and bike operations. But as you can see in the overall pie chart, pedestrian would fall under active transportation. This is only 4% of the total money. So these major rail infrastructure or highway projects are quite expensive. Just outside of Glendale, all the construction that's occurring on the I-5 in Burbank near the Empire Center is also a Measure R project. So there's a great deal of Measure R money being spent. Measure R2 potentially could have a similar sort of funding breakdown, although that's not been decided as of yet. And some of the conversations I've been involved with Metro recently, I would suggest that probably the operations piece of the pie is going to get a little larger. Metro, I think, is realizing they're building quite a bit of infrastructure, and if they don't continue to fund the operations, the labor costs, and the maintenance cost of keeping these new rail lines going, the amount of money going into construction is going to outpace the amount of money they have to keep operating it. So this is not the breakdown that the Measure R2 will ultimately have, but Move LA is putting it up there as a sort of what-if scenario.
Question, please?
Yes.
What is local return 15%?
Local return 15%, that is, would be, well, let me back up. The other pieces of the pie you can see are pretty much earmarked. So 20% would go to highways, 30% to rail transit, and specifically highway or rail transit projects would be identified in the measure. The local return component of it would be broken down into smaller pieces of the pie, then distributed to local agencies like Glendale, Burbank, or Pasadena on an apportioned share, probably relative to population. And then those local jurisdictions would be able to identify how they would like to spend the money. So local return is probably the best kind of money for us to get, in the sense that there's not really a lot of strings, there are not as many strings attached.
Thank you.
This is also from Move LA, the literature they're putting out, and that you would see if you attend this town hall meeting at Union Station or the one in Van Nuys. The colored lines, yellow, red, gold, green lines, those are the ones that already exist or have been funded with Measure R. You can see a number of dashed blue lines. These are potential routes that are being discussed in these town hall meetings relative to R2. So you can see one of the more significant ones, and at least in Van Nuys and San Fernando Valley, have people very excited, is a rail corridor or transportation corridor. The preference seems to be for light rail, running up Van Nuys Boulevard, ultimately up to the city of San Fernando and their Metrolink station, and then potentially tunneling under the Sepulveda Pass to connect to the west side and ultimately down to LAX. I will say, just to put how much money we're talking about in perspective, it was said at the Van Nuys meeting that the cost of building that tunnel under Sepulveda Pass would eat up half the money they expect to generate out of Measure R2. So all these rail lines and everything else that's anticipated is not going to be possible with the Measure R2 dollars, even though $27 billion just for rail is a pretty significant dollar figure.
Yes.
The dashed blue lines from Pasadena to Glendale, does that represent bus or light rail? What I read from here, it just says possible enhancements.
That's to be determined. There is discussion about both bus rapid transit or BRT and light rail or LRT through the sort of the east-west corridor connecting connecting Pasadena to the North Hollywood station, the orange line, red line. So this is, again, just the sort of map that's been projected and kind of pasted up by the Move LA groups as part of their town halls, trying to gauge people's interest. As I said, in San Fernando Valley, they're very interested in that Van Nuys corridor, especially with the connection to the west side. But they're going to be competing against, extending the Gold Line out to, say, Ontario Airport, which has also got a pretty significant regional connection. So after that image, the rest of the slides I have are more for the sort of viewing public to follow along. These are the same charts that are provided in your handout. And this is the mobility matrix that we discussed at our last meeting. Again, this is only the components of it that sort of affect the city of Glendale. From a much larger report that's referenced in the staff report that the San Fernando Valley Council of Governments reviewed. Metro, in terms of, if I could back up to this map, what Metro has done in the process of trying to develop Measure R2 or the projects in Measure R2, not only these rail corridors, but potential freeway improvements, bicycle paths, other kinds of infrastructure improvements, bus operations, et cetera, they have basically sort of passed the responsibility of developing a project list to the Regional Council of Governments. Glendale, Burbank is part of the San Fernando Valley Council of Governments, of which Councilmember Najarian sits on the board, as well as other representatives. Santa Clarita is also part of that Council of Governments. There are about 5 council of governments across the entire county. There's a West Side Council of Governments. There's a South Bay or Gateway Cities Council. There's San Gabriel Valley. Pasadena is part of San Gabriel Valley. And then there's a Central Council of Governments. So Metro had asked each of those individual councils of governments to develop basically a wish list for the Measure R2 projects. That's what we reviewed when we met a month ago. Since we've met, the various councils of governments, including the San Fernando Valley COG, has since met, reviewed an entire scope, the entire project, and adopted those lists. So the attachment that you have is the adopted list that affects the city of Glendale. I've excluded things relative to Burbank or Santa Clarita or the West Valleys. They're not terribly relevant in our discussion here. And it's a fairly lengthy report when you add it all up, but it's referenced.
Where's the nomenclature under those, the matrix, or that talks about, or that lists the blue dashed east and west?
Certainly. So if I may sort of breeze through the overall table of kind of how it's broken down, and I'll end with your question. So the table is broken down is starting with arterials, and you can see for Glendale, this relates to various kinds of arterial road projects that feed the sort of the freeway network. So the very top one you can see is the grade separation at Duran for the railroad tracks and San Fernando is the first Glendale project that would fall under an arterial category. But you can see there's some other elements such as Monterey Road, a frontage road along this 134 freeway, Glendale Avenue expansion to the freeway on-ramp. So a variety of projects where arterials, local arterials, would be a project that helps feed the freeway network by and large. Then, of course, on the second page, there is a long list of improvements to the main line of the freeway and the various freeway on-ramps and off-ramps. Obviously continues to be a fairly significant concern. The third page is mostly things related to active transportation and sustainability projects. So under here we have the first item is basically everything that's in the adopted bicycle transportation plan in the city of Glendale. Not everything we've adopted is currently funded under Measure R sources or other sources, so the hope would be that we can complete the plan using Measure R2. There's also complete streets, sustainability, park and ride, and kind of last mile, first mile projects on this. So this is much more of the sort of pedestrian and bike orientation page of the matrix. Page 4 covers various transit, principally bus operations. I do want to highlight one of the ongoing discussions we have with Metro that's very important for us locally in Glendale, as well as Burbank, Pasadena, and the LA Dash system, is funding for Tier 2 operators. The Beeline and Burbank bus and Pasadena system is considered a Tier 2 operator. That means we don't get funding through the funding allocation program that provides ongoing operations funding for Metro buses or Montebello buses or Culver City buses. We're sort of left out on the side without a dedicated funding source. So we're hoping that through Measure R2, we can get a dedicated funding source to sustain bus operations that are, at the very least, at our current service levels, if not expand. On page 5, we start getting into more transit as a continuation of transit, but I'll highlight the first one item here, T14, is a Pasadena to North Hollywood bus rapid transit via this 134 three-way through Glendale and Burbank. So that could be your blue dash line you're referencing.
And the dots that reference the benefits and the negative, et cetera, no benefit, who's the authorship of that?
Well, the entire list, as well as the ranking of these, was done through a subcommittee of the COG. So staff members from various of the various cities and representatives, probably I imagine, of some of the LA Council offices, in collaboration with the consultant that ultimately produced the report. So this is the kind of assessment that these various team members are making of these individual projects. But at this point, is not really a ranking system. It's not intended really at this point to be the kind of way these projects get prioritized. It's a kind of very high level evaluation of their potential benefits.
Thank you.
And then finally, on page 6, I've highlighted the 3 regional projects that I think are relevant to Glendale. In the full matrix, there's a number of regional projects. So these would include the Van Nuys light rail corridor that I sort of mentioned with the map. Not all of those regional projects that provide regional connections affect the city of Glendale directly. So there's 2 that might. T20, the top one, is Burbank Glendale light rail T21 is the one I wanted to highlight, which is Pasadena to Burbank light rail transit via State Route 134 through Glendale and Burbank, which is exactly the same item 2 pages, corridor 2 pages earlier, except called out as bus rapid transit. So there is some kind of interesting duplication in some of these. So that's where I said the decision of light rail versus bus on that east-west corridor has not been decided by the mobility matrix as both in the mix. So where things stand at this point is that...
If I may, but it would make a difference under the time frame if you're doing a BRT versus a light rail. Instead of realizing it, between 11 and 20 years, it could be, 5 years.
Absolutely,
Right?
absolutely. I believe that's probably reflected in their kind of gross time frame.
Okay.
So just a word about how the mobility matrix was put together. Basically, anything that was in any of the cities or metros' long-range adopted plans or the city plans that have been on the books but not yet implemented basically got thrown into the mobility matrix. So there are elements or there are projects that are listed here that have been on Metro's long-range plan for 15 or 20 years. And that's the first one on this transit list is the light rail from Union Station up to Burbank Airport. That's, as Che presented when we met a month ago or in February, that's been on Metro's plans as a kind of dash line for a long time. So it just ended up on the list. There has at this point not been any vetting or prioritization of the list. That is the next step in the process. So having all the regional council of governments adopting their mobility matrices, what Metro expects next is that the COGs and their representatives will now develop a priority list. Which of the various projects in this long list would they like to see prioritized? How would they rank them? Knowing that we're going to have to go into Metro through the ballot process and Metro's own processing with the other regional councils of governments and their lists to compete for, even though it's quite a bit of money, not enough money to fund all of these projects. As I said, the tunnel under Sepulveda Pass apparently could eat up half of the amount of money this measure would produce. Very important to the San Fernando Valley COG, but the chances they will get full funding for that through this process, I would say, are slim. So with the Commission's interest in this list, we'd invite your sense of priority, knowing that city staff or through city staff, we're going to have to represent to the COG how we'd like Glendale projects to be ranked. And your input and kind of direction may be very helpful as we have to arm wrestle for limited funding with not only the other members of the San Fernando Valley COG, but also elsewhere in the region. And just in a sense of time frame, Metro, in order to maintain their schedule to see this put onto the fall 2016 election ballot, which is their intention. I think they believe they'll have a better chance of success if they time it with the presidential election. The COGs are expected to deliver a ranked rating or their priority of the mobility matrices to Metro by May 22nd. And then it will subsequently go to a working committee of Metro staff before being presented and voted upon by the board in July, Metro board. And then at that point, the projects that will be part of the ballot measure become pretty well defined.
Alan?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And after your presentation of our last meeting, I reviewed this. There's may very well be wishful thinking, but what are chances of connecting, let's say, good from Central to all the way to Glendale, having streets similar to Pasadena, for example, so streets going straight shot, and from there picking up the streets going south to Glendale, just like Pasadena is. You exit when you're going to go down, you exit, for example, Fair Oaks, and you continue to Los Robles, make a right, or whatever street you want to go make a right. What are chances of that happening to alleviate additional traffic from downtown and all the traffic to stay up by the freeway? And same thing true for Sanchez,
Sure.
for example.
Well, there are two kind of components. There was in a mobility study and is still part of the ongoing evaluation to the Space 134 freeway cap project that Mike concluded with, an interest in developing what we call frontage roads on the freeway. So one-way streets that would be right adjacent to the freeway, just like they have in Pasadena on the 210. That would allow you, say, if you exited at Central, you could actually drive parallel to the freeway all the way to Glendale Avenue. That was a project that was suggested in the long-range outcomes for the mobility study. Where we've tried to really investigate that is through the Space 134 project. So if there's a possibility of building some sort of infrastructure for parks over the 134 freeway between Central and Glendale Avenue, perhaps there is a way of ensuring that we could provide those kinds of frontage roads, either on top of the freeway cap itself or maybe underneath the freeway somehow as part of that. We haven't quite figured that out. It certainly doesn't make a lot of sense to build a frontage road, say from Brand, if you're going eastbound from Brand to Jackson. You really want it to go all the way to Glendale Avenue, all the way to Glendale Avenue.
Or even Verdugo if possible.
Yeah. The Glendale off-ramp situation, as I'm sure you know, is very complicated, and there's not a lot of room there to improve it. So it's a very geometrically challenging place to try and figure out how we do some work there. So that being said, the concept of exploring the concept of those frontage roads is called out in the mobility study. It's been folded into the Space 134 project and our kind of ongoing studies there. And it is actually called out, and I'm looking at page 1, the first page on the chart, as part of Measure R2. It's the fourth item down, A12, 134 frontage road, connecting Brand to Geneva. So we threw it into the list. And we also, I should say, we also have money already in Measure R to do more detailed studies of that particular concept. The amount of money we have to do Space 134 is not significant enough to do those kind of hardcore detailed engineering studies of ramp alignments. We have more money as part of Measure R that's part of our programming, right? Money that we have programmed currently with Metro to kind of investigate that concept in even greater detail. So maybe a bit fantastical, as you said, but we're pursuing it. The issue of good is also on the Measure R2 to sort of extend good over the freeway. The challenge with good is that you could connect, I'm sorry, I was thinking of Orange Street. So Orange Street is on the list that you would want to bridge Orange Street over the freeway, but you're only connecting Good and Sanchez. It doesn't take you into the downtown. There's two very large office buildings and parking structures that sort of block your access into the downtown as an alternative to Brand or Central. But the frontage road concept is something we're definitely trying to explore with the thought, how can we accomplish it to mediate traffic congestion on the freeway and on city streets without also kind of damaging the neighborhoods that are there?
Absolutely.
There's what we do know is that a lot of the traffic congestion on Brand, Central, and Glendale Avenue is a result of Caltrans metering the ramps and basically pushing their traffic onto our city streets. Whereas in Pasadena, a lot of that queuing that's waiting for the meters on the ramps to let them on is happening on those frontage roads and not backing up onto Los Robles or Lake or Fair Oaks or one of their other north-south streets.
Thank you.
That is true. That is true, but there are peaks where the metering is justified, such as the Brand Boulevard on-ramp to the 134 in the eastbound direction. It is needed, unfortunately. Yes, Commissioner.
Given the last paragraph of the cover memo, and then the last sentence, I guess, of the second to last paragraph, where the timing on this is like now, where is our city council on the direction and relative to these items? I mean, it sounds like you're seeking information from this commission. Is there any other positions that have been requested or stated by our council on this, or where does that stand?
Not at this time, no.
So staff is going to go to a meeting in, you have to, first of all, I guess staff is going to submit to Metro next month. A final prioritized mobility matrix needs to be submitted. That needs to be submitted by us to Metro?
It'll be submitted by the
COG.
COGs, the Council of Governments. So in our case, we'd be partnered with Burbank, San Fernando Valley, a portion of Los Angeles, some of LA County, and Santa Clarita, and Metrolink as well.
So the COG group is going to do that, and then there's going to be a final vote by the Metro Board in July.
That's the schedule that the Metro
This is the
staff
current
gave us.
status, right?
There's also a step in there where I imagine the Metro staff will also have to do their own cost evaluation of these various projects, and the priority list is given by the COGS. And I would be very surprised if Metro staff doesn't to reevaluate the priorities.
So could you please put up the first visual of or the second or third visual of the map, please? Yeah, and on the one that the last one that shows, it says light rail, Burbank/Glendale, I don't know, light rail from LA Union Station to Burbank Airport. So is that which one is that there?
If you could see the mouse right here just above, out in Santa Monica Bay, follow me along. I would imagine that is this line right here. This is Union Station, and this is the Metrolink corridor right now.
So they would put a light, that option
Burbank.
would potentially put a light rail track adjacent to that track? I mean,
That would be the suggestion, or you can infer that out of this very minor sort of bullet item. I have to say, I think that's probably going to get dropped fairly quickly because California High-Speed Rail is also looking at that same right-of-way, and it's not wide enough to provide 6 tracks. High-Speed Rail will have their own 2 tracks, and then Metrolink and Freight Service have their own 2. Light rail would have to have another pairing because those trains can't all share tracks.
Yeah, and so, and the Metrolink station is at that little, about halfway there at the end of,
No, our Metrolink station
Could you show that,
is further down. It's probably right about here.
that's what I mean, right about there.
Yeah, this I imagine would be some sort of transfer between these 2 future light rails, one running kind of parallel to San Fernando, and then this east-west one connecting us to Pasadena.
So based on that response, Alan, it seems like that's not even an option for light rail realistically, cost-wise or anything, right?
I suspect it's not. As I said, there's right-of-way constraints. There's also the issue we're duplicating. Metrolink service already runs that corridor, so I'm not sure why we'd spend money on light rail. We could upgrade Metrolink
So
to provide
why
that.
is this listed under this one? I'm just curious. What brings that about? Is that a straw man or what?
Well, as I said, the mobility matrix, as I understand it, was basically anything that was on
Anyone's mind?
Metro's long-range plan that hadn't been funded, or any of the participating cities' kind of long-range plans that they hadn't funded, all sort of got thrown into the list and hadn't been vetted yet. So I think the vetting process is probably coming.
I had a little map I wanted to share, but I was going to share it under number 5, but this might be a good place to share, if you don't mind. And it's really just to talk about a little bit about history. Pass those that way, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I think that one of the reasons I thought this map was rather telling, when I was a kid, my dad used to take me on what was called the red car. And please take a look at, Glendale. And I know his most fun trips that we used to do was in Long Beach and back. And I'll vividly remember those. Occasionally we'd go to Pasadena and sometimes to Glendale. But you notice how that line goes straight up? I think we all know that used to go up Brand, I believe, up to Mountain. I think it's to Mountain, and you can still see some of the residuals of that there.
Bathroom is still there.
Is it? And there's incredible views from up there looking south. It happens to line up right with the downtown. But in everything showing us so far, and like mentioned earlier, I really appreciate this coming back and giving us a further presentation into all this. It seems like right now we will continue to experience no direct line to the downtown, to the Union Station, where then where it gets you everywhere from Glendale. Pasadena enjoys it. Other cities enjoy it. But if we're not the 3rd largest city in the county, we're the 4th. And it seems like just a huge void when you look at this system, how it used to work, and for some reason we didn't get it in this process, and it doesn't look like we're going to get it now. I mean, we might get a rolling stock east to west, maybe, but probably not a light rail, or am I misinterpreting that? Is that listed somewhere here?
Yeah, as I said, both light rail and bus rapid transit on the 134 corridor are listed, one under bus and one under transit. So,
Okay, so under regional, it's not, it's under transit?
under transit, the bus corridor, BRT, is listed. So
Yeah,
one
I-
presumes
But still, it doesn't
Right, that's,
do what you're saying.
yeah, no, it
yeah, it's the
only,
134 corridor. In fact,
is that T14? Just so I understand. Looks like it is.
correct, T14 would be bus rapid transit on the 134 corridor.
Bus rapid transit. Now, where's the one where it shows light rail?
That's on the following page, T21.
Okay, what are your viewpoints on that light rail happening since you were kind enough?
Well,
to give us your-
interestingly, a subcommittee, I want to say it's the Planning and Programming Subcommittee of Metro, which is various members of Metro Board, is going to receive a report on this Wednesday. I just found out about an hour before we started the meeting, on that issue of doing light rail or BRT on that east-west corridor.
What does that have to do with the COG, who has to give the report in May?
Well, in that case, there's a separate study going on at Metro about kind of planning for some of the kind of high priority BRT corridors, of which the east-west connection through Glendale to Pasadena, North Hollywood, or Burbank is one of those high priority corridors. So that process has kind of been somewhat accelerated. And while they're doing that, they're also, I think, evaluating light rail as a possibility. I haven't had a chance, obviously, to read that report and see what the conclusions are.
One of the thoughts that, since you mentioned about the possibility of suggestions, the chances of getting probably anything repeated that's on this red line are probably highly unlikely. I'm just going to throw that out as a question, not a statement, regarding light rail, because if not, maybe there's another way we can get residents that live in the city to be able to get directly to Union Station, and then from there they can go everywhere. Right now, we don't have that opportunity, so we're going to continue to base our lives on cars. So the question is, for the future of the city, why would we not consider some way of getting at light rail or directly to Union Station? And particularly right up Brand.
Commissioner Gonzalez, it is worth mentioning out when the Burbank Glendale LRT was first studied about 20 years ago, there was a downtown Glendale option. So, I would venture to guess that it's not entirely implausible, even if that original corridor, the option one, is not possible because of the high-speed rail. So that was studied, that was looked at as an option. I would say that, that is something that Metro will probably look at, or may look at.
So how do we get that on the table so that it can be prioritized? If the Transportation Parking Commission feels it's worthwhile to look at, how do we?
Is this list set in stone, or can we add projects to it?
This is the adopted list by the San Fernando Valley COG. So it is set in stone insofar as the COG's position has been stated. We're now being asked to prioritize this list. As I said, when this list, as well as the list from other COGs, makes their way to Metro and the Metro board, I suspect there will be lobbying by various constituents to sort of reprioritize things or add new things to the list. But my guess is it will probably be a political process.
Can certain things be taken off and then be added?
I would possibly. I don't know the answer to that question. For sure, things can be taken off. I think there's an expectation that things will drop
But
as the list is
nothing new
prioritized.
can be added in. It can be, the existing projects can be reshuffled, but nothing new can be added.
I'm not sure if there could be new things added as part of the prioritization process.
So the next time there's going to be a bond is probably going to be, if they do one in 2016, it won't be for years to come. So am I correct in speculating that this is kind of like one current chance to get the funding that would get citizens and people who live in Glendale with light rail to Union Station? I mean, when would we ever get this opportunity again?
I suspect there will probably be some future transportation funding somewhere considered in the next 30 years, but in the next 10, I suspect you may be right. This may be maybe the primary opportunity for the county over the next 10 years.
Right. So then this city and all the people that live within the county part of the city north of us won't have access to directly going to Union Station. I mean, like they did years past.
Correct.
Okay.
According to the charts that we have today
Right.
that we're contemplating. Short of maybe taking a light rail to Pasadena and then transferring and going south.
Right, which I really think is kind of weird. Maybe people would do that. Do anyone have any thoughts about that happening? I mean, I know if it's a bus route, it might, or even if it's light rail going east and west. The connecting to Burbank Airport has some merit, I think, for people living in the city, right? They could, in that east-west, they could get, if that other one ever gets done, which probably won't, because you've already advised the chances of that happening are nil.
But the east-west corridor has a couple of different options from Glendale to North Hollywood, and one of them does sort of shoot north with a detour up to Burbank Airport.
But it doesn't come into the central business district area. It's at the north edge of it.
Burbank or?
No, in Glendale.
Glendale.
It's a 134 corridor.
Well, yeah, it runs down it would probably run down the 134 corridor in some fashion.
So what if it would be possible to develop a non-metro system, but a system that's, say, run by a business district or so, up and down Brand, and then connecting it to where the metro line goes right now, to our station? And then maybe people would take that to get to Metro. Unfortunately, Metro doesn't come as often as it should to get people to Union Station.
Sure.
But I'm wondering, or is there a way to get some kind of a trolley or nothing really, really expensive?
I'm working on that.
Oh, you mentioned that,
And
yeah.
I will have a company make a presentation. They're building a system in Tel Aviv right now, Skytran. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it.
Fine with that.
Anyway, they'll be here to make a presentation. These are pods, 2 to 4 passengers. They ride on high rails, and they can build up to a mile a month. So it can very quickly be realized, and the cost is very reasonable, and it can go as fast as 100 miles per hour if you're not stopping, or as slow as you want it to go. And the capacity, because when I was studying it, I wanted to take it to Dodger Stadium. It can do up to 100,000 people in an hour, because you can add as many pods as possible. But to answer your question, yes, there are ways to do it. And I think that's how we need to start thinking, because even if we're allowed to put a project here, you're looking at 20 years to implement that project. We need something that's going to go in within 5 years, 4 or 5 years, so we can start benefiting from it. The city's growing.
Totally concur. I mean, it's
Is what you're suggesting, Chairperson Sahakian, something similar that we see in different airports going from terminal to terminal?
Yes, it's Heathrow Airport has one.
Miami Airport has it, and there's Tampa Airport has it. Many airports, even the United States, has it.
Yes, the Tampa one, I believe it rides on a rail, correct? It's a rail system. It's not a hanging. There are several different kinds. There are different
Tampa
companies.
goes up last. I was there last time, maybe about 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, I think it rides on a rail. But it's elevated.
It's elevated.
It's
yes.
elevated rail
I'm
system.
not sure if it's hanging down or it's on a rail.
Yeah. So at the next meeting, I'm going to be asking to invite the company that's currently working on the projects in Tel Aviv, so to make a presentation, and we'll be open also if once we look at that technology, at other technologies, and invite some other companies to make presentations, and maybe solicit some plans and bids to see how much it would cost, and put a plan together and push it. I mean, because we're looking at less than a mile probably of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner Gonzalez, you're looking at going probably from South Glendale all the way up to the 134 and connecting it to our station at San Fernando Road.
It's roughly a 2-mile corridor, maybe plus or minus.
Plus or minus?
Probably a little bit on the plus, maybe up to 2.5 from the 134 freeway down Central or Brand to the train station.
The notion of connecting it to the station, which I referenced earlier and you just mentioned, when I thought about it, sounds good, but then when we get to the station, we don't have a real commuter light rail there. We only have a Metrolink. We have a commuter in the morning, but not during the day, right? I mean, Metrolink only goes in the mornings and in the end of the day.
But I think if you build it, that would change.
Okay.
Because now there's the incentive to change it.
Right.
Because you're feeding it.
Right.
If I may, if you accept the idea that, or the proposition that high-speed rail will eventually service Union Station, the High-Speed Rail Authority staff has conveyed to us in various meetings and presentations I've seen the thought that the Metrolink service along the same corridor is going to change pretty dramatically. For example, if there's going to be a high-speed rail station in Palmdale going down to Union Station in 20 minutes, probably Metrolink is no longer going to be running Metrolink service up to the Antelope Valley. They will stop in Santa Clarita.
True.
And Palmdale residents will take high-speed rail. It'll be a faster option. So along our corridor, if high-speed rail is paralleling it, Metrolink service will probably start to perform much more like a kind of commuter or a kind of local rail system and not the long-haul system with limited stops. So how that dynamic is going to play out, high-speed rail and Metrolink have not really worked out because their focus is more on the Burbank station and north segment at this point in time. But I tend to think, given the way they've talked about Metrolink service becoming a feeder to high-speed rail, it sounds like they're anticipating Metrolink will probably behave more like a local rail system, perhaps with more service, because the long-haul trips will be done by high-speed rail.
So there's also the possibility, if you look at this map that I passed out, I'm almost sure that red car, after it left Glendale, well, first of all, there was no station like we have now in Glendale when this was together, but this goes through City of LA. This line here, this red car that used to go here, and if we look at that map over there, it would go along Brand and not go to the station, or you could maybe walk over a block or two, but then it would continue south and then go into neighboring LA and then go right to Union Station. So it'd be like maybe a short light rail. I don't know if that is even possible, but something that would connect the Union Station to Glendale through a system that our chair is mentioning, or another type of system that people who live in North Glendale and all around Glendale could jump on that commuter one that goes north and south. And since the reason I was asking the questions earlier about the park once, it would mean that we'd have to put a parking structure or so in there so people who live in Glendale can park their car in that parking structure, jump on that commuter one, and to get right down to Union Station, and then they get anywhere in the system. And we need to be thinking about that for the future generations of the city of Glendale.
All we're looking for is a connector to a mass transit hub.
Exactly. A mass transit hub that that operates more frequently than Metrolink.
Yes, yes.
And maybe it's a commuter that we can get engagement through the city itself, through a business enterprise district, through Mr. Caruso, who sometimes talks about, trams going here and there in some of his developments, not the kind he has there, but something that is actually functional for commuters. He might have some interest in some participation. He knows he sees the merit now of commuter transportation, and especially leaving people on and off on brand. So from an urban design point of view, it just seems like we've got to figure out a way to get to Union Station in a clear, economical way. And it seems like we don't have enough time to get it there, given the schedule I see. Unless someone, through some city council or some directive could figure out a way to get some political momentum behind this, because as spoken before in this commission meetings back, it seems like we would have to step forward if we as a transportation commission and the city council feel that it's the right thing to do. I don't mean to get ahead of the city council in any manner, but I do feel that it would be good to try to get this to the table if we as a commission feel it's important to get a connection to Union Station.
Well, I think insofar as there is a light rail, one of the line items in the mobility matrix is a light rail connection following the Antelope Valley Metrolink line from Union Station through Glendale to Burbank, that corridor is identified. We can express...
The blue one there.
Yeah, it's the blue one there. The mobility matrix and the map don't match up because they're generated at different times, but the map obviously is a useful reference point. But insofar as the mobility matrix does have a line item on a light rail transit, regional transit service between Union Station to Glendale and up to Burbank as one of the corridor options, we can express the Commission's preference that be part of the priorities or kind of ranked high on the priority list. However, that connection is actually accomplished. It may or may not be light rail, but it could be some sort of people mover system or something else.
That's a north and south you're talking about?
Yeah, correct. Because that is specifically a connection between Burbank, Glendale to Union Station. And it's called out as light rail. If there was another kind of technology and it wasn't specifically on that line, but it served that particular alignment, it would still, I would argue, still falls within the broad categories that the mobility matrix identified.
Oh, so even though it's not in that matrix now, you think there's something that could be?
Well, it is in the matrix.
It is?
Yeah, as a light rail option. As I said, I think a light rail option.
Maybe we can.
Yeah, I just lost the power on that. What number was that, please?
It's T20.
Here.
20, what is
T
On the last page, page 6.
Here.
Here it is, T20. Yeah. That's the one we've been talking about.
Correct.
But I heard you say that the chances of that, because it's light, high-speed rail and everything, might go away.
Well, I think the chances of there being a light rail alignment in the same right-of-way as Metrolink is probably low, given the likelihood that high-speed rail is going to take up that right-of-way. That being said, I think we hear the Commission's interest in that particular connection, and there may be an alternative way than defined in this matrix to and make that connection.
So we can say that we want T20 prioritized and introduce other routes to accomplish that goal.
Oh, I see.
There's a workaround for this frustration.
Yeah, I think we can carry that forward. I mean, for example, what if Metrolink service was electrified? They could run the trains much more frequently.
Then it's years away, still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, I think it's a 30 to 40-year funding scheme they have outlined.
So I'm going to preface my comments on the matrix just by kind of reiterating the frustration that we've had as commissioners on this topic. I think one of a really good recent model that we had for public outreach was the Riverwalk series of outreach meetings that we had. I think the consultants did a really good job with that outreach effort, that outreach exercise. I got phone calls and emails reminding them about the various meetings. I think there were 3 different meetings, all discussing this one bridge that would connect the city of Glendale to Griffith Park. And I think that now that we're talking about Measure R2, something that we're asking the residents to be taxed on for the next 30 years that will alter the future of the city. To not have a single public outreach meeting is really disappointing. So I just want to say that and make it clear, and I think I mentioned that last time, and I just wanted to say it again. Since we're being asked to prioritize these projects, I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I think that there's very little credibility behind A10 and A11. I didn't get really a satisfactory answer on both of those at the last meeting, and I'm not hearing much about it today. I don't know what A10 will do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as the table suggests, and improve the quality of life. There's a community garden in the way of that proposed routes, and I happen to manage that garden. We grow our own food using recycled water, and I don't know how paving a road over that garden will improve the quality of life for the people that are part of that garden and the people that live around that garden. I know Monterey Road is a pain in the neck for a lot of residents in that area because there are a lot of accidents along that road. There have been several drinking and driving incidents that have directly affected that garden. And speed is a serious issue along that corridor. So I don't see how straightening that road will slow people down or make it any safer. So I want to make a note specifically on that item, and I would like to not prioritize that. Same for A11. It seems like it would cost a lot of money to build a bridge over the freeway, and because of the uncertainty of how that would impact Space 134 and the great potential that space has, I don't know what benefit that has for the residents other than getting people that don't live here on the freeway as quickly as possible. So I have questions or reservations about that project. A26, widening Glendale Avenue. Note that there are no safety benefits that come with these A's, by the way, A10, 11, 12, and 26. I think that's shocking for us to be looking at projects that will widen streets and not even consider safety as a benefit. And it happens that these projects just don't provide a safety benefit. So we know that there are problems on Glendale and Durand. There have been several accidents there. We know that there are problems on California and Glendale. And I think to prioritize this as an arterial to make cars even go faster and bring even more cars to that street when there's a serious safety risk for people that don't drive is an issue for me. And a lot of people use the 9091 bus. There are a lot of elder people that go in and out of that shopping center along Glendale. It's a real concern. And I don't see how we are prioritizing that while at the same time talking about getting more people into public transit, getting more people to walk more in downtown. Those two things don't mix with me. So I have serious reservations about A26. T24, we talked about a north-south connection. T24 is a streetcar that would go from Glen Oaks to Colorado on Brand. That's a distance that I can walk in probably 12 minutes and ride my bike probably in 4 minutes. So to add a multi-million-dollar project that is a streetcar that would go that short a distance, I think is a big waste of money, frankly, when we're looking at all these other projects and when we're talking about prioritizing these. I don't see the benefit to the residents of Glendale other than those people that work in the high-rise and want to walk down to the Americana for lunch. I don't see how this is going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve the quality of life. I think it's a nice aesthetic touch to the downtown fabric. But in terms of practicality, I'm not sure where this project lies, and I would not prioritize that. B21 is one that I've heard from residents in the past. This is a park and ride next to Harvey Drive on the 134 freeway. I know that it gets filled very early in the morning and people get frustrated. This is their opportunity to park their cars where they live or nearby and take a one-way shot to downtown LA with an express bus. I think that's a service that we should continue to have in Glendale and have it be reliable so that people can count on it. And currently, that service is not being provided because the parking lot gets full and people can't use it reliably. So I would prioritize that. I would also prioritize many of the Bs under active transportation. If you look at the various benefits under mobility, safety, sustainability, accessibility, these are very dynamic projects that have a lot of benefit to the community. So all of these projects I think are worthwhile and they're worth prioritizing over others. The Verdugo Wash Bikeway, we're talking a lot. Residents are going and reaching out to the HOA groups. There's communications with staff. I think that's a project that we can champion in the city, and we see it in the city of LA with the Chandler Bike Path. These kind of projects provide a lot of benefit and can provide a real opportunity for people to get out of their cars to get around. What do I have on T20?
Bless you.
Yes, T20 we talked about, the north-south connection. Is that right?
Right.
I'm losing track of all these numbers. I want to echo the concerns about T20. I think that north-south is very, very important. And if there's a way to manipulate this item in any which way we can so that it can go through the COG and through Metro in this go-around, would be so valuable to the residents of Glendale who are looking for congestion relief and are looking for ways to get to downtown in a reasonable way. I think those are my comments. What do I have for B2? Oh, B2 I mentioned. So those are my general thoughts. I think that if we're looking for congestion relief and we're looking for people to get on light rail or transit or bus systems, we need to make them reliable, we need to make them accessible, and we have challenges with that today. And I think we need to start thinking about providing options for people so they don't feel frustrated and agonizing over their commute to work. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Commissioner Gonzalez, thoughts?
Well, I was looking at that map again, and I'm noticing how close we do enjoy one positive aspect of this system, except it's just not connected. We're close to Union Station compared to other cities and other parts of the system. I mean, in the southern part of our city is, I mean, you know, like Alex said, you could probably ride your bike from the southern part of Glendale to the Union Station. I mean, if it was done, it was easy to do safely. So to put a public transportation system from Glendale to the Union Station just seems like almost a no-brainer, given the population of this city. This is I mean, Pasadena enjoys a good connection, and they got, I think, 5 or 6 stations there, 4 or 5 maybe, within the city limits.
I believe it's 5. 5,
yeah. And yet they're much further, at least their southern part compared to Glendale's. So I wish that we could develop and maybe Alec has said it the best, and you had suggested it earlier, by having some kind of language that might get us that through this. My only concern is again the time issue. The time is the longer we take to get people to get used to light rail and public transportation, the harder it is to get the people to change it, I believe.
Okay.
Regarding prioritizing, one thing that I feel strongly is A10. That's Monterey connecting to Glendale Avenue. Reason being, that will alleviate a lot of traffic from neighboring streets such as Geneva South and Dorian connecting to Glendale, or people coming down downtown Glendale. And a lot of north of the freeway activity is flowing through south of the freeway. That's going to alleviate that. And I realize that house where there's a garden would be fall the victim of that, but that's part of growing pains, unfortunately. And if city is growing and there's more, and we're building all the structures, that's a growing pain. And I feel connecting that all the way to Verdugo is important for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, just like Good and Sanchez, for the very same reasons. And to keep the flow of the traffic away from smaller streets south of the freeway. And the same thing is true by doing that, we can alleviate traffic off Ethel and Mountain. Those folks who want to use Mountain and Ethel to connect to Glendale Avenue will use this street. The traffic on Monterey may increase perhaps, but that's where we have traffic lights, that's where we have street bumps, that's what we have police for. And unfortunately, I think to me that's a priority and should not be pushed back or perhaps removed from the list. And regarding Glendale Avenue widening, I was told by a few people, including commissioners, do something about widening Glendale Avenue because folks who are getting on Glendale Avenue going north just to get off their buildings and businesses and so forth, they have to wait in line because the traffic probably during rush hour there's a long line. People can't get off their driveways because people are lined up on the far right of Glendale Avenue. And the lights, the meters at the on-ramp is really is keeping a lot of cars on Glendale Avenue, and we're housing Caltrans traffic in the city during rush hour. And that's also part of growing pains that I think we have to deal with it. And unfortunately, unless there's other way of widening Glendale Avenue, that's the way to get those cars off our city streets and on the freeway and let them go back to their homes. And going back to other comments that you made, Commissioner Parstroff, I agree with you. And
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may try and broker a compromise between your two fellow commissioners on this issue. The issue of Monterey being extended over Glendale, over the Wash to Glen Oaks Boulevard was part of an early concept study for developing frontage roads on the freeway that was part of the mobility study. And it was very schematically sketched out. The idea was that there would be a frontage road on the south side of the freeway, which sort of exists to every other block, if you're familiar with like Maryland Place, as it sort of doesn't ever connect. It's kind of frustrating. And then on the north side of the freeway, Monterey Road was identified as potentially being the frontage road. And item A10, the extension over the Wash to Glen Oaks, was how that frontage road concept would be achieved. That being said, as we were evaluating the frontage road concept in greater detail through the Space 134 project, I think we're going to be exploring some other options for frontage roads. As I said, potentially putting the frontage roads on the roof over the freeway so that we don't have to impact adjoining neighborhoods quite as dramatically as maybe had been originally thought out. So I hear your concern about the need for the congestion relief to the freeway that option would provide, and also the concern that let's not blow through neighborhoods with new roads. And Space 134, as that concept evolves and as we study frontage roads in greater detail, I think we're going to look at a lot of different options and not just that specific solution. So if we continue to evolve Space 134, I think maybe we'll find a solution that achieves the congestion relief without impacting neighborhoods quite so dramatically. I hope. That would be our goal at any rate.
If someone's on Glen Oaks and wants to go get to Verdugo, options are limited.
Yes.
And that's why that's the only viable option that I see. If there's someone who's on Glen Oaks that wants, and you don't want them to be on Ethel.
Correct. As I said, the idea was, and as originally sketched out, was that Monterey would actually become, in some of the scenarios, a one-way road going westbound. So it would become the frontage road to the freeway, in effect, even though it's sort of one block off from the freeway itself. And the connection through over the Verdugo Wash would be the way that you would sort of maneuver traffic in that intersection. I forget the schematics exactly, but that was the intention of that line item. Was it was part of the frontage road option to alleviate the congestion building up on the 3 freeway ramps in and out of the downtown area. So as I said, hopefully we can find a solution that may be more expensive engineering-wise that could achieve that congestion relief, but without having to damage the sort of south end of the Ross Point neighborhood.
That's Ross Point neighborhood is very valuable and very established neighborhood. That's the reason I'm saying I'd rather have the cars on Monterey than on Ethel or Mountain.
Sure.
With all due respect to other stations.
Don't let the Monterey residents hear that.
Unfortunately, what I want to prioritize is not on the list. And T20 comes close to it, but honestly, if I'm to look at all these, the B plans are good, but my goal, what I want to achieve is within a 5-year time frame, have a connector to Union Station. And that's not a bus. The solution is not a bus. The solution should be a clean energy means of transportation that's extremely convenient. The bottom line is people don't use mass transit now because it's not convenient. It's not a secret. So we'll work on that, and hopefully we can achieve that with staff's help and with the commissioners, because I think we all are on board that that connector is needed. And with that, if there aren't any further comments, next item.
Item 5, Commission staff comments updates.
I think we're commented out. All right, let's move to item 6.
Item 6 is adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.